Hello, welcome to episode 2 of the Aim High and Achieve podcast. This is our first full feature-length podcast. Today we welcome Adrian Smith. Adrian is a senior research manager for a leading UK consultancy, as well as a contributing editor for the Kyiv Post newspaper. In 2018 he embarked on a life-changing career break teaching English in the Ukraine, a country that would become home until the fateful events of February 2022. Adrian, it's great to finally catch up with you. We've been planning this for a while, so thanks very much for coming on to the show.
Hi, Stephen. I'm great, thank you. It's good to be on your show.
Good, yeah, it's great to have you on. We've been planning this for a while, talking back and forward. Eventually, we've found the time to get together. So the main the main theme of this podcast today, we're going to talk about stepping out of our comfort zones, stepping into out of our comfort zone into something new, taking on a new adventure, people's reactions around it, family, friends, how they react to what we do, the decisions we're going to make. So we have something in common, Adrian. We both left the UK a few years ago. Myself, I came to Norway when my family had a young family at the time. You went to Ukraine. So
Yes.
That leads us nicely into some further discussions on that. But so around 2018, you moved to Ukraine. Just talk us through that decision and how it came about. And yeah.
So thanks, Stephen. So I'd been in a full-time role as a research manager for many years, based in North Yorkshire, and that I started that position in around 2008. And after a few years, I started to think it would be a good opportunity to take a career break and do something a bit different. I was at a point in my life where I could do that. I wasn't married, didn't have kids, but I was in my mid to late 30s. So I thought it's now or never, really, to do something which I felt compelled to do inside, which was to explore new horizons. So it wasn't an easy decision, but I found myself thinking that I was getting a bit annoyed when people told me, or some people told me, that that probably wouldn't be a good thing to do, and that it's safer to stay in a secure job, in that kind of dependable lifestyle. So I realized I needed to make that break when I found, that inner voice telling me that, I had to do that, and to try and fight against the reasons why not. So, I did take advice, and I had friends who, were on different sides of the fence. And in the end, I even went to a life coach, actually, and we talked about the pros and cons of that, particularly because at the time my parents were, a bit older. My dad was in his 80s, and I had to break that choice to leave the UK quite gently upon them.
But did you feel like you needed reassurance in that? Did you feel like you needed a sort of somebody who sort of reaffirmed what you were going to do and said, "Yeah, don't worry, everything will work out"? Or
what I noticed was that I wanted somebody to convince me why I should do it, and even though that's not the role of a life coach, I realized for myself that the fact that was what I needed, I knew already. That it was no longer a case of if, it was a question of how. So that was actually around 2016, I would say 2017. And what I also pursued at that time was a TEFL qualification, so teaching English as a foreign language. And that really intrigued me. I thought it would be something I would be good at. And I took a career break. Sorry, not a career break. I took literally a 2-week holiday from work in 2017 to do a workaway experience. And that was in a language school in Khmelnytsky, which is a city in central Ukraine. And I absolutely loved that 2 weeks. I felt fulfilled in many ways. Met some great people, loads of sort of other internationals who were there on similar experiences, some there a lot longer than I was. And I realized I was good at that. And I'd been to Ukraine before. I first visited in 2011, and I really loved the country. And I feel quite at home in Eastern Europe. So that was a reason why I wanted to go back to somewhere I knew, but somewhere a bit different and off the beaten track. A lot of people teaching China, that wasn't for me.
Yeah. So you'd visited Ukraine a few times before. You kind of knew the culture, the currency, a bit of the language maybe. So you almost felt like, okay, if I step out of my comfort zone here, that's the kind of place I know a little bit about it, and you're not sort of just packing a bag and yeah.
And what was really noticeable was how the kids and the adults I was teaching over there, even in that short 2-week period, how much they valued having me there to support them. And it was a great sort of sense of personal fulfillment, that I was actually contributing to something really meaningful in a different way. So I continued with the TEFL qualification. I got that at the end of 2017. And then I looked for opportunities to teach in Kiev, in Ukraine. And I found a role within a small kind of boutique language school. It was a startup business by a couple who really wanted a slightly different market and had an unusual offer, which was very kind of boutique style, living room style school environment. So I visited, went over there to see them and check it all out in March of 2018, and had a trip to the Chernobyl nuclear power plants, which was really interesting because I'd not been there before. And interestingly, the Monday after I got back, my dad had a heart attack. So that was obviously a real juggernaut to my sort of thinking, because I was literally planning at that time to move out to Ukraine and leave my full-time UK job. And
that in itself is a big sort of risk. You're leaving the stability of X amount of pounds a year. Your career. Do you put your career on hold? Do you then have to start again from the beginning? But then if you don't take the opportunity to travel and learn something new, you're going to regret that for the rest of your life. So you have people on both. I remember when I was telling people, I'm taking a job. Mine was a little bit different. I had a good job in the UK. I got offered a better job in Norway, and it was a bit of a no-brainer in terms of that. But I remember one bloke in a pub said to me, "Norway? What are you going to bloody Norway for? It's full of polar bears and snow." And just like the total naivety of some people when you have these decisions is like they're just so hunkered into the little town. They don't understand there's a world out there, and they're just so naive against anything outside the little walls of their hometown, their home pub, their home Tesco. And like people who head out and take on different challenges, it's almost like I wouldn't say they want to see you fail, but it's like they just question it, like, what the hell are you doing? Like, are you mad? But they don't realize, and then you do it, and 5 years later it's just normal for you, which I guess was the same.
Yeah, it was to a certain extent. My parents were actually really supportive, but I was, a little bit conscious of the fact, even though my dad made a recovery at that time, how would they be? But they were, like I say, they were really supportive, and I got that position, and I moved over to Ukraine in July of 2018. So I rented my house out, organized everything, and off I went.
Yeah, and then obviously you know as it's panned out in the future, you met your wife there when you first moved over. Talk about that, how that came to pass.
Yeah. So the time that I spent over in Ukraine living there, which was about 4 years, was such an incredible time. I got involved not only in teaching but in some acting work as well. Um, as a foreigner in Ukraine, and particularly in Kiev, there's a great expat community, and I was really fortunate that I was able to keep an associate role with the company I worked for in the UK, partly because it was a good sort of fallback mechanism, because it is a risk when you're going to work for a new startup company in another country.
Mm,
And because I wanted to keep a good relationship there, in case I wanted to go back to work for them in the future. And it's
mm.
obviously a bit of extra income as well. So
Yeah.
that
So
worked well.
you were sort of doing, I don't know, 20 hours or something in the UK, like remote working kind of thing, you know,
Yeah.
while you were
So
there. Yeah, yeah.
we had an agreement that I would do, produce certain outputs a month for them in the research work
Mm,
I was doing. Um, and it actually turned out to be a good decision, because the school I worked for um, didn't succeed after about 6 months, and I ended up being the only teacher effectively in that school. As I say, it was a very small startup business, and there's a lot of competition. So I realized quite quickly, after that 6 months, even though I was sort of doing a good job, and we had some great students, it wasn't turning out to be financially viable as the owners had hoped. So I made a transition to work for another language school, sort of teaching corporate English to teams, mainly business teams in the IT
mm,
sector. So there was a lot of visiting to business premises, and I actually found myself getting quite fit and healthy over there, because I was using the metro and walking everywhere. So I had a good
mm.
lifestyle, eating at the right times of the day, rather than when I was in the UK cooking heavy meals in the evening and not doing breakfast.
Yeah, because I think as well with a sort of 9 to 5 when you're working in these offices, I think most people, they're getting up early, probably not eating breakfast properly, going through the rush hour, getting to the office,
Yeah,
sitting slumped behind a desk all day, 9 to 5. You know what it's like in the UK, traffic wise and everything like that. You get
hmm,
out at 5 p.m., 5:30, you sit in traffic for an hour, get home, it's dark, miserable. Nobody
yeah,
wants to do anything, People just put
yeah,
the soaps on, watch crap on telly, eat and drink a load of shit, and
hmm,
then a lot of other countries you go to, I don't know, a lot of European countries, Norway, for example, Sweden. I'm sure Ukraine is pretty European type of culture there now. 3:30. Most other countries are kind of finished work and they're at home and seeing the family,
hmm,
and it's a
hmm,
massive different culture. The
yeah,
UK certainly gets bogged down with a 9 to 5 and people working silly hours, and it's a very different culture. So it's
yeah,
for me in Norway here. I mean, that's one massive thing is the work life balance.
yeah.
It's
That
almost priceless.
Yeah, and the work-life balance was really good, during that time, because I was freelancing, in everything I was doing, even the teaching, when I moved to that second role after the first school closed. But yeah, so things were going really, really well. And then COVID hit,
COVID.
obviously in 2020.
Yeah.
So, I think like everybody, we sort of hunkered down and, just rode that one out over
How are the
that
restrictions
time.
there in Kiev?
Well, one thing I did notice was that people weren't rushing to panic buy toilet rolls.
No, and they weren't
Um,
here either.
yeah, so and I think that said something about, well, it says two things about the Ukrainian people. Firstly, they're a type of people who are used to dealing with difficult challenges.
Mm,
And they're also, but that can also be a bit of a weakness, because maybe there was a slight element of denial. until things started to lock down. But then and the lockdowns weren't as severe as they were in the UK, but we did get them at slightly different times. So, like the UK government, Ukrainian government experimented with different restrictions. Some of them seemed a bit too draconian, and others more sensible. But I would say that it certainly wasn't a lockdown to the same extent as everyone was experiencing in the UK.
And now when we look back on it now and just realise what an absolute farce it was,
lessons to be learned.
Massive pharmaceutical companies making billions of dollars out of vaccines and scaremongering and all this kind of thing. And we look back now, and it was almost like a 6 months after COVID. It was like, oh, do you remember that bloody COVID pandemic that just happened? And it's kind of just erased from the memories, and like left $1 trillion deficits all over the place, and it's just crazy. I think I felt I had COVID twice, I think, and it was quite mild. I had maybe 2 days off work or something, but I was far worse after the second and third vaccinations. The second vaccination knocked me out for a week. So I mean, God knows what was in those things. We'll never know, I guess. But and then so 2019, COVID, 2021, 2020, come out of COVID. You're still in Ukraine,
yes,
and then and the tanks rolling.
Well,
couldn't get any worse, could it?
Yeah, so just sort of backstep a little. So you asked me earlier about meeting my wife. So so I met Elvira on Tinder, actually. So
right.
It does work.
How did you translate that? Tinder Ukraine? Did you have Google Translate on to figure it out?
No, it's all in English, really.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, we met online, and I remember our first date. I went to meet her outside her apartment, and I thought I was going to be swindled, and I made sure I kind of stayed several meters away from the edge of the building just in case I was going to be robbed. But no,
is that a common thing? Is that a common thing? That kind of sort of activity?
Yeah, actually, I will say this in Ukraine there are, and I'm not to say that that's any different to other countries, but you have to be on your guard for somebody who might be looking for simply just looking for an iPhone, not really a partner. So there are a few interesting characters there.
Did they maybe see a kind of Westerner? Okay, maybe he's got a few quid, and we can kind of,
exactly.
kidnap him or
that did actually very nearly happen.
Okay.
I did have one date where we went to a restaurant for a meal, and she was telling me about her family, and she had a sick granny, needed to go and get granny's medicine, and she had to do that after the meal. Do I want to go with her, spend a bit of time together? We got in the taxi, and I realized this isn't a taxi. We did go to a pharmacy in the middle of a district I wasn't familiar with, and the bill from the pharmacist was about 100 times what it should have been. I wasn't prepared to pay it, and then she ran out, got in the so-called taxi. Well, she got in the front seat, and I thought, who gets in the front seat of a taxi? So so you have to be careful. Anyway, luckily, when I met,
you survived
Elvira,
that one.
Yeah, and Elvira looked just like her photos. Was lovely. We had a nice date on the Dnipro River on a boat cruise in the evening, and had a few subsequent dates, and everything seemed to go swimmingly. So that was in the summer of 2020, actually in COVID times, but when restrictions were a bit lighter there, so obviously we worked around that. We got engaged in 2021. Had a nice holiday to Montenegro that September. I felt a bit naughty going there because it was currently on the red list for the UK. So
Okay.
I figured if anything happened in Britain and I needed to get back, I'd be snookered for 2 weeks. But no, that was so that was a good year really. And our wedding was booked at the time for August of 2022.
Okay.
So this becomes relevant later for other reasons, but we got Elvira a visitor visa to spend Christmas in the UK. So that was in the December, and she came and met my mum. My dad sadly passed away in summer of 2021. But anyway, in the December she came here and had a nice visit. Went to London, did some lovely things, and then it was back to Kiev in January 2022, where we were planning, for all intents and purposes, to continue living.
And you work for the Kiev Post, is that right?
So yeah, that December actually, the Kiev Post relaunched after it was temporarily closed, and the chief editor, Bohdan Nahailo, was a sort of contact of mine in Kiev. We'd met on the expat scene, and we talked about my helping sort of get the Kiev Post back up and running. It's a long established 25-year-old news outlet in Kiev that's broadcasts to in English and also in Ukrainian. So I helped out mainly in an editing role because that was what I had time to do around my other stuff. So that kind of gradually picked up as a freelance job, and yeah, and then things were getting interesting on the news front because there were concerns that Russia was building up a large concentration of troops on Ukraine's eastern borders. Sort of 90,000, 100,000, 120,000, the numbers kept changing. And that's when things started to get a little bit unsettling.
How were people kind of reacted in Kiev? Were they sort of, this is nothing, no stress, or were they kind of thinking, bloody hell, something could be going down here?
The former, and that's where I come back to the point I made earlier about COVID and the reaction to COVID. And I mentioned, could there be an element of denial among the people? And I actually feel that there sadly was among many people. Life in Kiev was continuing as normal, and but I had foreign friends, and we were having, and obviously British friends as well, were getting in touch with me saying, do you want to think about getting out? And for a while, maybe during January, I was starting to think I need a contingency plan because if something does happen as a foreigner in the country, you could be at greater risk. If Russians were to come in and things were to go terribly wrong, and they were trying to look for bargaining chips. So and there were a lot of, with the editing job I was doing, I was reading a lot of op-eds by writers who were hypothesizing what a possible invasion scenario might look like, be it a small incursion into the east where Russia already held or was occupying land, whether it was up from the south to create a land bridge between Russia and Russian-occupied Crimea, which it had held since 2014, or a full-scale invasion or an attack on Kiev from Belarus. And I thought to myself, well, in Kiev, you're probably safe as long as Russia doesn't start positioning troops in Belarus. Then came the stories that weapons were being, there's evidence of shipments heading over to Belarus on the border. So there were satellite images of troop concentrations there. So it started to feel like things were not necessarily just a bluff from Vladimir Putin.
Almost like you're being surrounded at this point.
Exactly. But the school I was working for at the time, I remember I spoke to one of my colleagues there, and I said, are you a bit concerned about how this is looking? And she said, no, it actually seems to be easing up. And I thought, I don't quite believe that. So anyway, we come towards middle of January, and it seemed then like the greatest risk of a Russian attack on Ukraine would be around the 20th of February, because they would still need to attack while the ground was frozen so that tanks could move more easily.
Okay.
But also the 20th of February coincided with the end of the Olympics in China, and Russia and China have very close ties. So Putin wouldn't want to do something to distract attention from the Olympics. So there was a window of shortly after the Olympics finished where I thought that that could be a serious issue, serious problem. And the intelligence coming out of the US was not promising, and they were started advising their citizens to leave the country. So what we did, Elvira and I booked an apartment in Krakow in Poland for a month, where we thought we'll just go spend a bit of time there, work from there temporarily, and just wait for it all to blow over. So we went to Krakow on the 12th of February, and after a week there, we started to think we'd overreacted. Probably nothing was going to happen, but I'm a bit superstitious, and I've been experiencing some strange phenomena with flickering lights, and that started to get worse and worse when I was in Kiev, and I thought, is this a message? And then Valentine's night, we were in a restaurant in Krakow, and it was a basement restaurant, and suddenly all the lights in the restaurant started violently flashing on and off, and it was really the weirdest thing. And then they came back on again, and I just thought, that's a bit weird. So we never know, but I was sort of really conscious of this.
Do you think possibly maybe anxiety was, you were thinking, and sort of every signal was sort of pointing to that, possibly, but
possibly.
Did you leave much in Kiev? Were you in an apartment block? Was it damaged? Did you get to go back after, or did you leave everything and then go back to the UK from Poland, or did you head back?
So I lived in, so this is another interesting thing. I lived in an apartment building in Kiev on the top floor, 26th floor. And what concerned me most was that the building was next to, shall we just say, an intelligence building. Right. And I was concerned that that building could potentially be a target if there were airstrikes, and what would happen if they missed. Bearing in mind I was on the top floor, so I thought, for safety reasons, it's probably not ideal. So anyway, we're in Poland, and the night of the 23rd of February, we'd just been out for a meal. I couldn't really sleep that night for some reason. I woke up a few times and just checked my phone, and I saw reports from BBC News that explosions were being heard in Ukraine. And then these reports became more frequent, and it was then apparent that Russia had launched a full-scale, multi-pronged invasion of the country, and they were firing missiles into Kiev and other cities. And they began very quickly, I don't know if it was on the same day actually, but very quickly a ground assault from the north. And from the east, I think from the south as well. So things got very nasty, and it became quite dangerous. And I had lessons planned that day. So that morning I was seeing the news reports of people fleeing Kiev. The roads were blocked. The aviation was locked down, so people had to travel across the country by road or by rail, neither of which were pleasant experiences. And I had an American friend with a wife and baby in Kiev who made the journey west. It took them probably the best part of a day or two, and similar time again stuck on the border trying to get into Poland. So it all happened very quickly. And
that's the kind of story, you don't really think about it, but if you think about going on holiday with a baby, how stressful that is, and you're just in Manchester airport or something, and you've got a baby and it's stressful. But imagine if you're trying to get out of Kyiv and you've got a baby and you're stuck on a border, and that's probably one of the most ordinary stories of the whole thing, but it's probably the one that's just totally not appreciated for how terrible it is.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's probably not too bad if you're a single bloke, or maybe it is bad. I don't know. But if you're on your own, you've only got yourself to look after, you know, and you're getting out of there. But when you've got a family, you're trying to get to a border. I mean, in the Western world where we grew up, you wouldn't even think about having to flee, get to a border, and find safe haven. We just take everything for granted. And in this modern in the world now with social media and Snapchat and everything's on reels and videos, and you literally see things from the front line. As I remember on the day of that invasion, I actually had COVID. And I was watching Sky News. I very rarely would watch the news, but I was watching Sky News, and it was like, Jesus Christ, like, this is serious. Like, the tanks rolling across the border and full-scale invasion, and it's interesting. You have how the Western media will report why Russia is doing it, for example, and then you'll have the Russian side of why they are doing it. And it's really difficult to get a real true picture of what's happening. What's really happening.
Well, I think it's sort of what does seem very black and white is that without getting too much into the politics, that Ukraine wasn't in any way threatening Russia, but Russia just invaded the country, and without justification whatsoever, or with false grounds, and attempt to effectively bring Ukraine back into the sphere of the dream of the resurrecting the Soviet Union.
So piece by piece, like the Crimea, the Donbass, area by area, they're literally just seizing the land back.
Yeah. What's not clear is whether Vladimir Putin genuinely feels that there is a threat from that Russia is under threat from NATO, and he was concerned that NATO was getting closer to his borders. But it's what Ukraine has always struggled with is that it straddles the kind of East-West divide. And in 2014, the Ukrainian people overthrew the Viktor Yanukovych presidency. He was a pro-Russian president because he refused to sign an association agreement with the EU, and young Ukrainians in particular were European minded, and many are, and so that was what kickstarted the tension, and Ukraine's desire to be a sort of a European country, and Kiev to be a European city, and the aspirations of the people to want to live more democratic lives, which they can see more through social media and Facebook, which
so they're looking more to the west than to the east.
Exactly. And for Vladimir Putin, that's very much a threat. It's a threat to what he sees as the one people, the Ukrainians and the Russians. But he doesn't want that to happen, and he's doing everything or has tried to do an awful lot of bad stuff to stop that from happening.
So the previous Ukrainian president signed a Minsk agreement, and then the current Ukrainian president is not for the Minsk agreement. Is that kind of the simplified? Basically, to give the Donbass as an autonomous region, and not have it. And I don't think Zelensky was honouring that, it being an autonomous region, basically. So I think Minsk basically said NATO will never come to Ukraine, and Ukraine will never go into Europe, and the Donbass will be autonomous. But I think Zelensky, leaning to the West, was basically, yeah, from what I've read into it, is basically going in the opposite direction. Putin's doesn't like that, and hence where it's at now.
There also is that tension in, because the more you go towards eastern Ukraine, the more people have sort of closer kind of cultural and other ties to Russia, and are supportive of Russia, and the same in to a large extent in Crimea in the south. But ultimately, Ukraine since 1991 has been a sovereign independent nation, and if you want my opinion on this, then invading another country is not the way to solve that problem. And a lot of journalists talk about the re-invasion of Ukraine in 2022 because the first time was in 2014.
Yeah, and I guess it's like Ireland, Northern Ireland and Ireland, and that's been rumbling on for centuries. So it's probably comparable to that kind of thing in the east, with this Donbass regions and the people there. Half probably half Ukraine, half Russian, and then you have towns, Belfast is split into two, Catholic, Protestant, this. I'm guessing, having never been there, but from what I've read, I'm guessing it's that kind of situation. And then, Putin flexes muscles, sends the tanks in.
Yeah. But what's been particularly brutal is the fact that this war has been conducted almost in a genocidal way. The attacks on civilians, the attacks on homes, restaurants, just brutal attacks on ordinary people.
These Iranian drones, you see flying in, it's just crazy when you see some of the things going on. I just watched a documentary just before we met up today. I just watched a documentary on Wagner. I think it's a Wall Street Journal on YouTube. Right. Wall Street Journal, Wagner. It's a documentary showing, really interesting, showing how they've got interest in the Central African Republic, in Syria, Sudan, and it's basically doing Putin's business abroad. Gold mines, oil fields in Syria, and now they fell out. Now he was turned his tanks onto Putin. So I mean, it's all falling apart, really.
Yeah, I mean, as we speak, there's still a lot of analysis going on relating to the what happened with the Wagner Group and the sort of march to Moscow as they were supposedly doing. But I mean, as much as Prigozhin is very much a bit of a bad guy, really, for the Ukrainians, so he publicly said that Vladimir Putin's premise for the war in Ukraine was false. And he said a few home truths, actually, which was not what the Kremlin wanted to hear. The problem is, what do the Russian people hear? The Russian people get the state-controlled media. The social media is blocked in many cases. Much social media is blocked in Russia, which tells you something.
So you don't have Twitter, for example, as a live feed?
I don't know about Twitter, possibly, but I know there's restrictions on Facebook and Instagram. Usually, some restrictions out there.
So it's like China. It's in its autocracy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you asked me a question about my apartment, didn't you? So just going back to that, so we were in Poland for about a month. February the 12th to March the 12th, and then luckily, because my fiance, she was at the time, had that visitor visa for the UK, she was still within that period, so we were both able to come to the UK. And that was when Britain was trying to organise a visa regime. Excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. That was when the UK was trying to organise a special visa entry system for Ukrainians seeking to flee. and we were able to. She was already able to enter the country, but as a result of these new measures, she was able to cross over to the Ukraine Family Scheme, which allows 3 years. So yeah, that was a godsend, really. It gave us some stability.
I remember reading about this scheme, and you had the brilliant stories in like the Sun and the Daily Mail. These Ukrainian wife. I invited a Ukrainian into my house, and she stole my husband and all this kind of thing. It was like it was always in the Sun how Ukrainian women who were being given homes were stealing everyone's husbands left, right, and centre. You know.
Yeah. I think there's lots of stories from lots of different angles with them. I know somebody who came to live with somebody who had about 10 cats, and that proved to be a nightmare, and she didn't like the cats, and the woman kicked her out. So give it for those on the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which is slightly different. I don't think everybody who took in the Ukrainian, although good for them for doing that, not everybody was had really thought it through, and it was rushed through, and it was admirable in many ways, but I think a lot of people had difficult experiences.
Yeah, and I mean, it's from what I've read about Ukraine, it seems like quite a stoic place where people are not sort of leaving en masse. A lot of people are sort of holding the ground, kind of thing. And I think that's been kind of why it's been the Russian invasion has been sort of held back so well, because people didn't just sort of flee. All right, there was some sort of pictures at train stations and things in the early days, but it seems like they're quite a stoic people who sort of stand the ground, and quite steady resistance against it.
Yeah, one thing that's important to mention there, though, is that under martial law, men are not allowed to leave Ukraine, and haven't been since I think the 25th of February 2022.
Right.
So that's had a real strain on families. So a lot of people who've left the country are women and children who have continued to be separated from their husbands and partners. There are exceptions when men can leave, but that has put an additional strain on. And I think it's important to remember that a lot of Ukrainians want to go home, that have left and have gone home. Some have gone home, and very few have lost their lives in attacks that I've heard of. You mentioned people leaving train stations. Russia bombed a train station, killed lots of people. So it's not easy, but I've got friends there now who continue their resolve, and why not? That's their home.
And you still have a lot of touch with people back there. You're still sort of speaking to them regular basis.
Yeah, my wife has friends who are still there. I've got friends who are still there, so we kind of keep in touch on social media, the usual, really. But interestingly, I did mention about the my apartment building and where I was living, and there was actually an attack next to my apartment building, and it blew quite a few of the windows out. Not my side actually, but no, I don't think there were any casualties, unless minor casualties. But that was almost one of my sort of fears coming true.
And when you read the sort of the Western press, so the BBC, for example, how sort of accurate do you find that they're reporting? Sky News, for example, I noticed watching Sky News nowadays that they actually start to tag on fact checks at the end of reports. So they will put a video, and then they will put, we fact checked this against this, and they're kind of, it's probably good to see, but again, but how sort of accurate do you find what the sort of Western press are reporting on it?
Well, ever since the invasion started, what has been interesting is how much support there has been for Ukraine in what's happened, and support, and in the UK in particular, taking in Ukrainians who are stuck. The media has I can't really talk too much about Sky News because I don't follow it greatly, but the BBC has, I would say, been pretty good in their output, and they have BBC Verified, which is a similar sort of fact-checking service. Some news outlets tend to take a greater interest than others. I know that the Telegraph is very plugged into this, and they have a lot of interesting articles actually. But there is a lot of.
I think the Guardian has kind of like a daily diary of day 904. This is what happened, and they have a daily ongoing sort of report from the front lines, and I find it interesting. Like a lot of the American press now, they're starting to sort of question Biden's links to Ukraine. You see a lot of this coming up now, with the Republicans are kind of saying to Biden, there's a lot of dodgy deals going on here that need looking at, and then nobody's going after him for it. Nobody's really talking about, his son, and some crazy energy deals. And I know for sure if it was Trump, they'd have been all over it. He'd have been before the Senate or something already. But Biden, he seems to get away with not having to answer these questions.
Yeah. And what's also interesting is the support in financial terms for military aid to Ukraine. I mean, the billions that have been supplied is still going on, and it's helping to kind of prop up Ukraine's ability to defend itself. But who knows where that will go in the future? Mike Pence has visited Ukraine as a Republican presidential candidate to show his support, which is in somewhat contrast to other Republican candidates. But if Donald Trump was to be re-elected, then the picture might look very different. So the bigger picture is defending Ukraine, defending actually Western freedoms, because where could it all end? So there are some big questions there for the future, and we don't really know where this is going to go. The media continues to follow kind of breaking new directions in the war, like particularly the Prigozhin mutiny, as it was called. But generally, when it's the same crap on a different day, unfortunately, it doesn't always get media attention. And I've got a number of friends here, and my barber being one. She said, "Is the war still going on? Because I don't hear about it." And I said, "Yeah, you just don't hear about it because there's nothing that actually changed. It's still just as bad today as it was yesterday." So it's sort of fallen out of the press, but that's natural, obviously depending on what you're reading.
I think it's like a natural. You become desensitized after the first week of seeing the bombs and the explosions, and then you see it after 2 weeks, and then it's just normal, and then it's almost like a Hollywood movie that's just on the news, and then you just desensitized to it, and then after 1 month, like you say, you've forgotten it's going on. The newspapers get tired of reporting the same thing, so they move on to something else. And then the Wagner guy goes up to Moscow, and then boom, this is brilliant, this is something new, we can make a new angle on this, and then it comes back again for a little bit, and then it drifts away, and that's kind of how it went in Iraq, and all the other conflicts is the same kind of thing. So are you thinking of heading back there when this gets cleared up? What's your sort of long-term plans now? Are you sort of settled in with the family in North Yorkshire?
Yeah, so just to bring the story up to date then. So actually last summer, Elvira and I got married in Kiev. It was our original plan. We ended up changing the date. But where we had originally hoped to get family and friends over for the wedding, we realized that was going to be out of the question. So in June 2022, when we were there for pretty much the whole month, it was relatively calm. There were air raid sirens, there were attacks, but that was before Russia started its campaign of targeting the energy infrastructure in Ukraine. So it was a relatively calmish period. So we were really lucky. But we got married, and we had a Zoom wedding for our family and friends in the UK. So we had a good sort of 70 or 80 people join us remotely, which was great. And obviously a few friends there in Kiev. So we had a lovely wedding day, and then we came back to the UK in July. And fortunately, we were able to bring all our stuff because we only had one bag each when we went to Krakow and came back to the UK that time. So we knew then that when we were going back that we needed to bring a lot more. But then I also then my wife became pregnant in later that summer, and I had a difficult decision that I needed to go back to Kiev to wrap a few things up. So some business interests and my permits and everything else. So I had a week over there in February of 2023. It was a little bit worrying, that period, because it was approaching the anniversary of the invasion, and there was a lot of speculation that Russia was potentially going to launch something of an onslaught. That particular week was fairly quiet. So again, I was lucky. A lot of people aren't lucky, but yeah, that was a chance really to tie things up there. We knew that we were going to be back in the UK long term. I made the decision that with family on the way, baby on the way, needed to get back into a more stable lifestyle. So again, good job I kept the associate role with the company I was working for. I was able to go back to them full time. So that's what I did, and here we are now, back in North Yorkshire, in the same house I was living in prior to 2018, although it looks very different now. My wife's put a stamp on it, and it feels like a slightly very different era to when I left. I'm mentally in a very different place. I feel like I've lived a dream in many ways in those 4 years. It was an amazing experience. Loved Ukraine. I've got a part of Ukraine living with me here. And longer term, to answer your question, who knows? But never say never. It won't be short term, that's for sure. But maybe taking a sort of 10-year view. Let's see where we are. But there are some hurdles, obviously, with visas and so on for Elvira to continue to stay here, which we'll need to work through. But hopefully that will be ticking a few boxes, really. So that's where we are now.
Yeah, so it's a great story. Sort of comes back full circle. You sort of headed out there, got disrupted by COVID. Battled through COVID, and then sort of got to the point where armed conflicts at your door, and then you sort of deal with that. You've brought out of Ukraine a family that you went there without, come out of it with a family, come back to the UK. Yeah, it's a really interesting story. So do you still do? You're still working for the Kiev Post now? Are you still editing this?
Yeah, so I work as a contributing editor for the Kiev Post. So I as much as that is it helps with a bit of extra pocket money. It's something I enjoy doing because I feel like I'm contributing to the effort over there. And I enjoy it, really. So that's something I do in kind of evenings and weekends, really, around the day job.
Yeah. Great stuff. Yeah. Okay, Adrian, we're starting to run out of time, so I'll thank you very much for your time today. It's been a really interesting story. Great stuff.
Good to talk to you, Stephen.
Good luck to the family.
Thank you very much, and to you.
Okay, bye.